The United Nations Security Council holds an emergency meeting on Monday to confront Russian incursions into Estonian airspace, a development that places fresh strain on already tense relations between Moscow and NATO. Both Estonian and UN officials confirm that the session is requested after repeated breaches of Estonia's borders by Russian military aircraft. The meeting becomes a focal point for debate over sovereignty, security, and the boundaries of international law. Estonian defense authorities report that Russian aircraft cross into their airspace multiple times in recent weeks without prior clearance. Although the violations are brief, Estonian officials describe them as intentional acts of intimidation rather than navigational mistakes. Tallinn frames the incursions as part of a larger pattern of coercion by Moscow, which regularly tests NATO's eastern flank with military flights, cyber activities, and exercises along the border. Estonia stresses that no matter how short the incursions are, they threaten its sovereignty and challenge the credibility of NATO's deterrence. At the UN headquarters in New York, the Estonian delegation insists that the issue is not confined to a small Baltic state. When a sovereign nation's borders are crossed without consent, it is not just Estonia's problem, it is the world's problem, the Estonian ambassador tells reporters before entering the chamber. If international law allows exceptions here, then no state is secure. Estonia calls for a united response that reinforces the principle of territorial integrity, which is enshrined in the UN Charter. Inside the Security Council, the debate grows heated. Representatives from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France echo Estonia's concerns, pointing to Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine as proof that Moscow has little regard for international boundaries. They argue that repeated airspace violations may look small but form part of a broader campaign of pressure against neighbors who resist Russian influence. Diplomats from NATO-aligned states emphasize that the violations raise the risk of accidents or escalation, since NATO aircraft on policing missions routinely intercept Russian jets in the Baltic skies. Russia's delegation pushes back strongly. Moscow denies any deliberate violations, claiming that its aircraft follow international rules and that any alleged crossings are either fabricated by Estonia or caused by minor navigational errors. Russian diplomats accuse NATO of fueling hysteria in order to justify its own military buildup in Eastern Europe. They point to frequent NATO exercises near Russia's borders as evidence of double standards, arguing that if Russia flew near NATO airspace, it is no more provocative than NATO maneuvers near Russian territory. The Council's non-aligned members listen carefully, aware of the larger stakes. Some express concern that the issue adds fuel to a confrontation already destabilizing Europe and global markets. Others stress the importance of dialogue to prevent an escalation that could spiral beyond control. The chairperson of the session reminds delegates that the Council's role is to preserve peace, not deepen divisions. Meanwhile, NATO headquarters in Brussels confirms that Allied aircraft are on constant standby to respond to any further incursions. The alliance already conducts enhanced air policing over the Baltic states, rotating fighter jets from different member nations to reassure Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The latest violations, however, spark fresh discussions about expanding the mission and deploying additional surveillance assets. NATO officials make clear that the alliance will defend its members but will act with restraint to avoid unnecessary escalation. In Tallinn, the Estonian public reacts with both alarm and determination. Media coverage highlights radar images and flight paths, while political leaders rally citizens around the message that Estonia's security rests on both its own readiness and the unity of its allies. The Estonian Prime Minister addresses Parliament, declaring, "Every centimeter of our sky is ours, and every violation is unacceptable." Public opinion strongly supports Estonia's firm stance at the UN and calls for even closer ties with NATO. The UN Security Council, however, faces its familiar structural obstacle, Russia's veto power. Even if most members favor a resolution condemning the incursions, Moscow can block any binding action. Analysts predict that the meeting is unlikely to yield a concrete resolution, but they note that the debate itself has value. It places Russia's actions under international scrutiny and gives Estonia a powerful stage to press its case. Diplomatic observers suggest several possible outcomes. The Council may issue a non-binding presidential statement, urging respect for international law and restraint on both sides. Alternatively, the meeting may end without consensus, underscoring the divisions that define the Council in an era of major power rivalry. Whatever the immediate result, the fact that the issue reaches the Council agenda signals that the international community takes Estonia's concerns seriously. For Russia, the meeting becomes an opportunity to project defiance. Russian diplomats portray Estonia as a pawn of larger Western powers and argue that the real destabilizing force is NATO's expansion. They claim that Moscow seeks stability but cannot tolerate hostile alliances encircling its borders. For Western states, however, the evidence of repeated violations reinforces their belief that Russia deliberately undermines European security. The stakes extend beyond Estonia. Airspace incursions in the Baltics connect directly to the broader conflict in Ukraine and the contest over Europe's security architecture. If violations go unanswered, NATO allies fear that Russia may escalate its pressure on small states to test the alliance's resolve. Conversely, if NATO responds too aggressively, the risk of direct confrontation grows. The situation becomes a delicate balance of deterrence and diplomacy, where every flight and every diplomatic statement carries significance. As the emergency meeting continues late into the evening, diplomats search for language that can calm tensions without papering over real disputes. For Estonia, the bottom line remains unchanged: its sovereignty is non-negotiable. For NATO allies, solidarity is essential. For Russia, the priority is to avoid censure and shift the narrative. The UN chamber becomes a mirror of a wider world order where old rivalries resurface and international law is tested by power politics. When the session concludes, no binding resolution emerges, but Estonia secures what it seeks: international attention and allied solidarity. The issue of airspace incursions does not disappear, but it now sits squarely on the global agenda. The meeting illustrates both the limits and the importance of the UN in an era of geopolitical rivalry. It cannot enforce solutions when major powers clash, but it provides a platform where even small states can demand accountability from larger ones. The Russian incursions over Estonia'S airspace thus become more than a regional dispute. They highlight the fragility of peace in Eastern Europe, the risks of military brinkmanship, and the enduring relevance of the principles of sovereignty and international law. As Estonia's ambassador reminds the Council in closing, if the borders of one small nation are not respected, then none of us can feel secure.